Like you're saying with your book, there's a difference between like this is written to convey information, period, and this is written as more of like an art form or to convey my personality and my experience.
You're listening to the Building a Coaching Culture podcast. If you need to compete and win in the 21st century labor market as an employer of choice, this podcast is for you. Each week, we share leadership development, coaching, and culture development insights from leading experts who are developing world-class cultures in their own organizations. And now, here's your host, J.R. Flatter.
What are some of the case studies for uses of generative AI? We talked about a few of them already. Content creation. We write thousands of proposals, well, not thousands of proposals, thousands of pages of proposals a year. A lot of rinse, wash, and repeat, but a lot of original thought customized to the particular customer. We were just having a discussion of this morning. Monthly reports, which are by and large the same every month, except for a couple of changed statistics. What are your thoughts on the application of generative AI for those kind of tasks?
Yeah, I think it's particularly helpful and useful, like on the ideation side. Like I'm trying to brainstorm, like you mentioned, right-clicking for synonyms, take this idea and give me 10 variations of it. Or we do this creative writing thing called it's almost like a mind map or a word map, like go from blue to feeling to sadness, like keep going one step away from the original word. So I think like that kind of stuff, like I'm using this generation to then inspire the final product. Research, if I don't want to look at like 100 websites, synthesize all the knowledge you have out there into, a couple pages or a paragraph. I think, it can be useful in like straight content generation if it's like low stakes. But, like you're saying with your book, there's a difference between like this is written to convey information, period, and this is written as more of like, an art form or to convey my personality and my experience.
Yeah. And I know, and you probably get the same dozens of emails a day from strangers who've tried to mask their communication that they know you already. And I get things addressed to Flatter. I get things addressed to Jay. I get things addressed to John. If anybody calls me that, I know they don't know me. But I would imagine that it's relatively simple to create that kind of content and customize it. If you're doing mass emailings, and we must have 10,000 email addresses in our database that we know they've all been students or somehow related to our world. And it's not cold calling. It's not spamming. They're in our world because they've chosen to be in our world. We couldn't possibly sit down and write a customized email to each one of them, even though we might want to. So I think, there's probably very legitimate use. But then I also know one of the things you and I teach is when you reach out to someone that you need something from or desire to have something from them, one of the first things you should do is make a human-to-human connection with them. So in that 10,000 database email address list that we have, how does generative AI make that human-to-human connection, or can they yet?
I feel like that's one of the cases where it might not be the best suited, because it's like maybe, 80 out of 100, it does make like a pretty good connection. And then 20 of them, it's just, like the cheeseburger example or the logo creation. It's like, it didn't even, nothing in this email is correct,
Yeah, I know years ago, you and I are in our early part of using even social media, hired a content creation company that was going to help us create content. It just turned out horribly. They wrote articles that had nothing to do with our business and had no relevance to you or I or what we were trying to convey. It was really crazy. And that were human beings. I'm sure they were cutting and pasting from other content they already had and customizing it a little bit. But yeah, the human-human connection is something as simple as hey, you're from Jersey, I'm from Jersey, or oh, you went to George Washington University, I went to George Washington University, or you're a Marine, oh, I'm a Marine, or my dad's a Marine. Yeah, we're probably a ways away from doing that. How about modeling and simulation? I know we talk about the Monte Carlo test. Have you tried any of that yet?
I haven't done it personally, but I've seen lots of research and application where, getting it to navigate a video game or, you know, I mean, a basic example too is like those chess algorithms, like more advanced forms of that. So, given a possibility of 20 moves available to me now, and this is similar to the Monte Carlo where you're just simulating like 1,000 different moves over and over, and then every time a chess move is made, the graph of possible moves changes. And so yeah, you can kind of get it to even like Microsoft Word or Excel. You can say like, okay, click on every button available to you, enter data randomly, and eventually it kind of forms a model of like, this is how this program works based on what's available to me, and this is the purpose of it, without having to say like any of that to begin with. That stuff's kind of cool.
Yeah, I could see that there are use cases that you can get you within a left and right parameters of confidence. But again, I go back to my own history in statistical analysis, or even hurricane modeling. That's statistical analysis and draws a map for the potential path of the hurricane. Or modeling a football game between two opposing teams. They all use the same kind of math to get the result. And the Monte Carlo runs it through thousands, if not tens of thousands of scenarios, picks the most likely outcome. But even that outcome in statistical analysis, we call it the R squared. And a perfect guess would be an R square of 1.0. Your R square is down in the 0.2s or 0.3s if you're lucky. So that's a lot on the table. So in many ways, unless I'm wrong, I see AI as like a next gen modeling tool when you're trying to do modeling and simulation, that you're taking data, coalescing that data and making a prediction from it. And it's extrapolating, which means looking outward from the known data. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be far from perfect. I heard on the way in that the weather predictions for storms in the Midwest of the United States were pretty accurate, that they said, here's the area of potential danger. And most of the storms were in that area of danger, but it was the size of Texas, right? And so, there's a lot of value, but still a lot of unknowns. So talk to me a little bit about synthetic data. This is interesting and a bit concerning. So I've done, data sets in the millions, very frequently in the hundreds of thousands, usually with human beings. I tend to be more of a social scientist than a physical scientist. And all of that data that I used were real human beings with particular characteristics that were captured as variables in the data set. But now using AI, we can create synthetic data sets. And I'm just wondering, how do I, as the analyst, know what's synthetic and what's real?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, would the insights that we gain from like the synthetic data be, even comparable to the real data? Because, what are we ignoring, or what are we, not taking into account with that? And I was talking about this with our CEO, Brittany, the other day, and I think it's important, and we kind of touched on this, that you, in just in terms of like understanding the problem and understanding what's being input, and determining how valuable the output is, something. And I guess this kind of hints at, what is AI good at right now, or these language models. Something it's really good at is, on the basic level, like sentiment analysis. Is this positive or is this negative? And then, well, that's simple because, it can only be one or the other. But maybe instead of sentiment analysis, I want, 200 categories to be mapped to. And so rather than manually saying, like, okay, this message says X and thus it's X category, just letting AI do that in a matter of seconds and having a pretty high degree of, confidence that it took this data and then mapped it to this discrete data set, successfully. Whereas if I just said, give me categories that you invented, maybe some of the categories don't make sense to me, or some of the categories are, not useful. So I think with the synthetic data, you might get insights that are, not practically useful because, what about this synthetic data is different than the real data, which, I don't know. It seems it seems overly complicated, but I'm sure there's some smarter minds that, you know, are able to make it useful, but it seems limited to me.
Yeah. And then the last thing, and before we wrap up, face and voice replication. That's a little bit interesting. So we've discussed many times in the past that, and this goes back to the neuroscience and how the brain works, that a eyewitness is one of the most unreliable kinds of evidence that you can have. Because if I just looked at your face for a split second, even though I've known you your whole life, and someone asked me, please describe Lucas, I'm going to sit, think long and hard. Or was that Lucas in the coffee shop yesterday as you fleeted out the door as I was sitting down? I don't know. The mind plays a lot of tricks on us. So now we have this ability to take a recording of anything from anywhere and replicate it with anybody's face and anybody's voice. What are your thoughts there, my computer scientist friend?
I mean, I think that it is pretty successful and it is pretty convincing with real people with their voices and, within the context of video. And I guess the limitation there is that it really is a snapshot. Like, this began at this moment and it ended at, a couple minutes later. And it's like, if we kept filming or if we kept generating and generating, eventually it would become more and more obvious because, our brain says there's something a little off, but I can't put my finger on it. And then after an hour, it's like, he hasn't blinked like in 5 minutes. Or when he does blink, it's like, predictably spaced. Also, like something that real humans do, and this is kind of how they detect like human writing versus AI writing. Let's go back to speaking. Like I'm speaking right now and I'm like 2 seconds away from falling on my face and, like not being coherent at all. And maybe the more I speak, the less coherent I get in a way, or if I'm nervous or, getting off track. Whereas the AI will always be like just as unpredictable or just as, coherent or just as there's some things that I'm varying based on just my feelings and, my breathing and, how I woke up this morning, even that will be giveaways like whether I'm a real person. But yeah, within the context of a couple minutes of video or, of audio, I'm not sure if there's a good defense, like as a human. Maybe the algorithms could have a high degree of success tracking that, but yeah, you and I are going to have to become a lot less reliant on like, "Oh, well, I saw a video of it, so it must be real."
Oh, yeah. So there's a story in the news right now of a school district in our community where the principal was suspended for months and nearly lost their job because a teacher at the school was using AI to fake their voice in fake phone calls and making very offensive, derogatory statements. And it was believable enough to get that person suspended and sent home for months. Nearly cost them their livelihood. Well, last thing, and we'll save this for another session, but in our next session, let's focus on generative AI in the learning and development space. And we'll start that in
Yeah, that's
another
definitely
time.
a
But
topic worth discussing at length.
yeah, but I guess in closing, I think we're at the birth of another era. I might not have phrased that completely accurately, but similar to the 1990s when the internet started to get its legs under it. And there were two sides of the journey. One was, this is going to revolutionize everything, and this doesn't change anything. And I think now, 30, 35 years later, we're seeing both of those came true. So I have the anticipation can do a lot of very good things, and then the trepidation that we need to tread purposefully. What are your thoughts in closing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to sum it up, and I've kind of given a presentation towards the company on this note, but like, imagine that you have like an assistant, and they can code and they can write and they can do X, Y, and Z, and it's maybe just assuming they're a human, maybe they just read this programming book and they're so it's fresh in their mind and everything they tell you is correct, but they're not quite always correct on another domain. So just as if it was a person that's your assistant, you should verify, be skeptical, use it if it's useful, definitely, and take advantage of it, but just with that mind that you know you don't just take people's advice off the street and then make a major decision off it. You shouldn't, take AI decisions like that.
Cool. All right, my friend, we'll see you next time. Well, that concludes this episode of Building a Coaching Culture. I truly hope that this episode was helpful to you. If it was, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Maybe stop and give us a rating or a review, and share this podcast with someone who might find it helpful as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.